In the English language, a dog fight suggests one dog fighting another. A cockfight suggests one cock, a male chicken, fighting another. Nobody would say that a cockfight means a human being stomping on a cock. Yeah, but bullfighting is the exception. When we talk about bullfighting, we're generally not talking about one bull fighting another. We're talking about a human being slaughtering a bull in a public display.
Yesterday, 29-year-old bullfighter Victor Barrio was gored to death by a bull that he was slowly and agonizingly torturing and, of course, planning to kill. The tragedy of the bullfighter's death took place in a town in the east of Spain called Teruel. I think that's how you pronounce it, but that's not really important. The astonishing thing is that this bullfighter's death, or rather the bullfighting, was being broadcast live on Spanish television. Something else that's just incredibly shocking is that, according to Spanish custom, the mother of the bull who gored this idiot to death had to be sent to the slaughterhouse and have her throat cut, and she was killed in a horrible, torturous, painful, agonizing way, because Spanish custom says if a bull causes injury or death to a bullfighter, then its mother has to be slaughtered.
This anecdote from Mark raises a bunch of different memories for me. First and foremost, because I lived in the past on the border between France and Spain. I could remember the surreal contrast because I did know vegans, really serious vegan activists, only a couple, of course. I knew really serious, passionate vegan activists in that part of France. None of them talk to me anymore. And, you'd have these debates about these very fine points. What about honey? What about feeding, what about cat food? Naturally, when you have a group of vegans sitting together, everyone's already vegan. You're not debating the most basic ideas, and then the topic would turn to, oh yeah, on Saturday there's a protest against the bullfighting, and the contrast would just seem so hilarious. It would just seem like, oh yeah, right, here we are in the 21st century, and this is a debate. We're still asking the question about torturing an animal to death in public as a form of entertainment. And as a contrast to that, when I was on the internet, back then I had a blog talking about veganism within Tumblr, I remember there was a slogan that some people had as t-shirts and some people just had as a graphic saying, I support animals that kill their trainers. I support freedom for animals that kill their human captors. This is being promoted as a political slogan, like as a protest move within veganism. And I know what they're talking about. They're talking about situations where, a lion kills the lion tamer. I think at that time an elephant had killed someone at the zoo, and they were arguing, no, even if an elephant kills a human being at the zoo, that elephant should be set free. That elephant didn't do anything wrong. That elephant should be congratulated for doing something heroic and something right. And to me, again, Mark has none of these tendencies, but he reminds me of that danger of vegans thinking that becoming ever more self-righteous, ever more extreme, ever more narrowly defined, and ever more militant, that we're going to become more influential. But the real question is, how can we assemble this set of emotions and impulses we have into a really actionable program, whether that's a program for public education or a program for the pursuit of political change. And we have this saying in English that all legislation is based on animus. It is a sad thing that when an elephant kills a human being, people want to take revenge on that elephant and people want to kill that elephant. But if we're ever going to move beyond being 1% of the population, if we're ever going to motivate and reward people for getting on side with such simple and fundamental questions as refusing to wear leather, refusing to eat meat, the long-term pursuit of the end of the cycle of domestication, exploitation of animals. It's not going to be digging yourself in to defend the life of an elephant that's killed a human being. Even though I admit it appeals to me. There's something grandiose. There's something... Maybe that's the villain in me. There's something villainous in not just wanting to rescue and free elephants from the circus, but specifically wanting to rescue that elephant, of wanting to rescue and reward the elephant that killed its human captors, of wanting to rescue, the bull that killed the bullfighter. To be sure, that's something that probably stirs many young and rebellious vegans. But look, the challenge ahead of us the next 20 years, the next 200 years, is how to take those rebellious sentiments and really do something useful with them.
2,000 years ago, in ancient Rome, the Romans used to torture and massacre animals in the Colosseum or in amphitheatres all over the Roman world. And yet, in the year 2016, Spanish people are watching these animals being tortured and massacred in exactly the same way, in what is effectively amphitheatres. Not much different to the ancient Romans. I thought we had progressed. I thought that Spain was quite a decent, sort of civilised country. It appears that I was wrong.
But I've also lived in several different parts of Asia where bullfighting exists in its own indigenous form. And over here, bullfighting instead has the same meaning that you would expect it to have, in parallel to cockfighting and dogfighting. Here where I am right now in Kunming, at least once a year, they have bullfighting at the so-called Stone Forest. Stone Forest is a local landmark. I'm sure in the province as a whole they have many other towns with that tradition, where they get out two bulls and have one bull fight the other. Obviously, to make it an event, they have many bulls fighting the same day. Traditions of that kind are scattered around East Asia. Some of the outer islands of Japan still organize events of that kind with bull fighting bull. And of course, where I was in Laos, just a short distance north of the capital city, there was a major annual festival with bullfighting. By that definition, not a human fighting a bull, but having a series of bulls square off in a contest. I was working inside the Lao government in a peculiar department that's best known for publishing the government-controlled newspaper, but actually that department does a number of other interesting things, different types of government communications and research. There were a few other things aside from the newspaper that I learned a lot from by working inside that department. But our intrepid reporters, all of whom were government officials, you understand, all of them, what we published there was 100% a government-controlled message, went out to report on these bullfights, and he did. I mean, I worked with the original draft. Obviously, the final article that was published was censored, so I forget how much of the original description was in there. But he wrote this dramatic description of all the different elements of what was going on in the crowd. Among other things there, the crowd really did feel afraid. The bulls would charge at one another, but just as frequently they would get angry at the humans surrounding them and charge into the crowd, trying to escape or trying to, knock over some of the people, or both. So the crowd was there. They were not passively sitting on the ground watching this event. They were standing, and everyone in the crowd, you could even see in the still photographs, they were constantly ready to kind of sprint in one direction or another, wanting to watch the spectacle, but at the same time very much feeling that their lives were in danger. And the psychology of the crowd and the psychology of the bulls were all written up in this report. It was handed to me to edit and prepare for the press. And one of the things that the journalist or the government official, observed, he said, many people were unprepared for how unique each of the animals was. Each of the animals really had his own psychology. These are all bulls, so they're all male, so I can say he instead of it. That sometimes there'd be a bull that was really massive, had big shoulders and looked strong, and people were expecting it to be aggressive. but just its personality was friendly. One of the most anticipated matches, the two bulls, when put together, just got along. They were just friendly towards one another. They sort of, nuzzled each other and, had the equivalent of a conversation. There was no hostility. And then on the other hand, some of the smaller bulls turned out to be really tenacious and plucky and pleased the crowd with their bloodlust or what have you. At one point, I remember the article noted that the fans of the sport would record how deeply the horns of the bulls had penetrated into the other bulls when they gored one another, which didn't happen all that often, as you can imagine. And the journalist turned to me and he said, "What I don't understand is how they actually measure the depth of the wound." He was imagining these fans of the sport inserting a ruler into the wound on the suffering bull. At the time, I suggested to him that no, he had it the wrong way around. What they would measure was how much blood was on the horn of the winning bull. You can see these were the distractions I had when I worked these sorts of jobs, while at the same time doing research, applying for humanitarian work, teaching myself both Pali and Laotian. In some ways, an intensely meaningless life I was leading, I guess. I learned a lot. At that job. If I'd stayed any longer, I probably would have learned less and less with each passing day. But for a short time at a job like that, I learned a lot. And I had access to a lot of government documents, government research, NGO, United Nations documents rendered to the government in English and so on. So I learned a lot, not just about bullfighting. The sense in which I have mixed feelings about this is that, by contrast, many people I spoke to connected to Japan, including one of my own professors who was Japanese, one of my friends who is Japanese but living in Canada. They all remarked to me that Japan is now such an intensely urbanized culture that children grow up completely alienated from having any notion of what these animals are. Now, I would add what these animals are like in the wild, but these children are alienated even from knowing what the domesticated animals are like. And I've been told many times, when you ask a Japanese child to draw a picture of fish or chicken, they'll draw like a small red cube for fish, or they'll draw something similar. They'll draw, a diced white cube for chicken. And, one Japanese person told me that, in person. And then I remember I mentioned it to my professor, who's Japanese, in conversation. He said yes. He said that was incredibly common, incredibly widespread, because there is just no sense of connection to what these animals are, let alone who they are. And that report on bullfighting in Laos, as brutal and as terrible as it might be, you could see that this event, which is of course carried on for the sake of tradition, and again, it's a bull fighting another bull, not a human, that the people participating and witnessing it, even though that's not why they're there, even though they may be there just out of bloodlust or what have you, they really are forced to witness the unique personalities of these animals. That the animals have, different characters and different personality types. Let's leave it at that. And they get to see some of the natural behaviors for these animals, because of course, in nature, domesticated bull now barely resembles. Well, okay, it resembles to some extent the aurochs, its wild ancestor, but these are animals that have been very much transformed by domestication. But still, you're getting to see some sort of behavior that, it shouldn't be for human entertainment, but it is something that comes to them naturally. So, when I was in France, living on the border between France and Spain, in exactly that area, French Catalonia, where the different Catalan provinces all had to decide whether or not they were going to ban the sport, the different French provinces had to decide whether or not they were going to ban the sport, or to what extent they were going to ban the sport. It really is one of those moments where people have to look in the mirror and ask, what is civilization anyway? Mark here says repeatedly that this reminds him of the brutality of ancient Rome. For most of Europe, clinging to the tattered remnants of ancient Roman civilization defined civilization. That was refinement. That was high culture. And genuinely, in that part of France and Spain, you literally walk past the remnants of the ancient Roman Empire. It's a very hard thing to look back at human history and say all of this was an error. For centuries and centuries, we thought tobacco was good for us, we thought it was a medicine, or we thought it was harmless, and now we know that's an error, and we just have to limit tobacco. For centuries and centuries, we thought that this sort of use of animals was precisely what differentiated us from barbarians. This is what made us civilized. This was our high culture. And to look at all that and shrug it off as only so many centuries of error, it's a very hard thing to do.
A lot of people in Spain are very upset, and the Prime Minister is paying tributes to the guy and saying what a wonderful man he was. To be honest, I couldn't give a shit that this bullfighter died. In fact, when I heard the news this morning, I had a smile on my face. I would applaud the bull for killing the guy. If you're going to spend your life torturing and massacring animals in this disgusting, out-of-date, sort of ancient Roman way, then, if the bull turns around and kills you, you get exactly what you deserve. Victor Barrio got exactly what he deserved.